Ever since the beginning of 2020, I've been on a mission to beat 100 video games every single year, and immediately after finishing each game, I rank it among every other game I've beaten, not by objective quality or historical importance or anything like that, but simply based on how happy it made me personally as I played it. So now that September is over, it's time to look back at the 9 games I completed this month and tell you where they landed on the rankings and why. So let's go ahead and kick it off with Castlevania Legends at number 9. I took a 4-year break from the Castlevania series before picking it back up again, and let me just tell you, this is probably not the best reintroduction to the franchise. Like most Game Boy titles of the era, Legends is a very basic, bare-bones version of the 2D platformer that pales in comparison to its console counterparts. And also like most of those handheld games, this entry has very finicky controls and imprecise platforming that had me screaming at my controller throughout the experience. It is novel to be playing as a female Belmont, but aside from a couple brief text conversations, it's very easy to forget that that's even in play. What's also novel in the worst way is the confusing weapon system. The old sub-weapons are now just collectibles that you can't even use, and the new soul weapons are rarely of any use at all. There are moments when the old music is playing and you're fighting some of those classic enemies that this does begin to scratch that familiar Castlevania itch, but that's almost entirely the nostalgia talking. I'm not saying Castlevania Legends is bad. Considering the limitations of the time and the historical significance of the series, it may even be good, but on a 50-inch screen in 2024, I just didn't find it to be very fun. Next up at number 8 is Lollipop Chainsaw Repop. Whenever a remaster is announced for a game I've never played, I try to make time for it, because if it's getting re-released, the original must have been good, right? Not always, apparently. Let's start with a positive. While it's not entirely unique, the combination of over-the-top insanity, irreverent comedy, and hack-and-slash action does make it pretty memorable. Its closest relative is probably Bayonetta, because it's absolutely unhinged and there's a lot of button mashing, but this experience falls short of something like that in pretty much every way. The combat isn't nearly as varied or smooth or fun, the boss fights are downright bad, and since the toilet humor isn't that funny, it just comes off as repulsive. Some of the writing is so forced it feels like what out-of-touch old people would write if they were trying to get younger people to laugh. And I have to question the validity of this re-release even existing. There are weird bugs all over the place in the new one, and I pulled up footage of the original and I cannot see the difference. $40 isn't unreasonable for a remaster per se, but it does seem a bit high for a buggy port of a 5-hour game that wasn't even very good to begin with. Moving on to number 7 now, we've got Star Wars Outlaws. I really wanted to like this game because I'm a defender of the Ubisoft open world formula, but after Avatar and now this, whatever magic they once had seems to be lost now. As I was trying in vain to enjoy this, I was racking my brain thinking, why can't I get into this like other open world games I've loved recently, like Ghost of Tsushima and Horizon Zero Dawn? And after giving it a lot of thought, I've landed on 2 main reasons, starting with the depressingly beige storytelling. This company needs to learn that it's not enough to set your game in a cool, well-known universe. The stories and characters actually need to be compelling for players to want to spend time in that world. And secondly, it's great that they filled multiple open worlds with things to do here, but if the activities themselves aren't much fun and the rewards are just cosmetics and cash, nobody's gonna care. Just like Avatar Frontiers of Pandora last year, Ubisoft has built another beautiful playground for us, and they filled it with the most basic, boring-ass activities and loot imaginable. Star Wars Outlaws isn't bad, it's just very generic and void of inspiration, and I desperately hope this company has the humility to listen to some critical feedback and get their heads back in the game. Following that up at number 6 is Life is Strange True Colors. Much like the original Life is Strange, True Colors is a roller coaster ride of highs where I think it's a masterpiece coupled with lows that make me wonder what the hell the devs were thinking. There's some clear strong points here, like a mostly excellent story filled with compelling, fleshed out characters with complex motivations and realistic movement and facial animations that could sell all that. There's also your usual amount of crazy Life is Strange plot twists, but in between the pacing repeatedly falters, and especially in the middle, things really slow to a crawl. But all that would have been fine if they'd stuck the landing at the end, like for instance in the original, but here's where I think they really dropped the ball. There was so much potential for a really satisfying conclusion, but it just never gets there, and your final choice at the end seems meaningless because the main conflict is already over. I was happy to see they finally added a streamer mode, but instead of replacing the licensed music, they just remove it, and it's ridiculously distracting to watch people sing and dance in absolute silence. True Colors is still excellent about 70% of the time, but that other 30% is so overwhelmingly disappointing that it really left a bad taste in my mouth. After that, and just cracking the top 5, is the Plucky Squire. This brand new 2D and 3D action-adventure had some hype behind it, with Devolver Digital signing on as publisher, and I would say it largely lived up to that hype. First of all, while the whole 2D and 3D combined thing isn't totally new, I'm not sure I've ever seen it delivered in such a diverse but also very clean way. They really knocked that aspect out of the park. And when I say diverse, I mean diverse. This isn't just Zelda served two ways. You've got about 10 or so different genres crammed in here, constantly changing up the gameplay. The core combat itself is very basic and will probably get old fast, but it seems like every few minutes you're playing a new genre, from rhythm game to twin stick shooter to match 3 and much more. My only real complaint is a minor one. The hint system in place only seems to help out with easy solutions, and anytime I was stumped by one of the more obtuse puzzles, there were no hints to be found. But the Plucky Squire is still an excellent and largely bug-free experience at launch. It won't rank well because this genre is not really my thing, but I would still recommend it with confidence if you like the premise. Coming in at number 4 is Anotria: The Last Song. I've played through almost every Souls-like there is, and I pretty much always love them, but I think this is the worst Souls-like I've ever beaten. I started out feeling hopeful. The art design is gorgeous, the combat has a lot of variety, and the highly complex level design was some of the best I've ever seen outside of a From Software game. But it wasn't long before these picturesque landscapes began to unravel before my eyes, and it really started when I noticed how horribly unbalanced the combat is. The poison element in this game is so OP that it makes everything else meaningless, and I almost never used any of the special abilities because they were all garbage. Everything looks cool, but the actual plot's very vanilla, and the whole "you're faceless and you have to find other shells to unlock classes" thing has already been beaten to death in this genre. The most frustrating issue is probably the sheer number of bugs and glitches. I was pulled out of the fun over and over and over by freezes, crashes, and enemies just straight up breaking down. I still ranked this way higher than it deserves because I can't help but play and love every Souls-like, but I can't recommend this unless you're also one of those people that just has to play them all. Jumping up to number 3, we have Beyond Galaxyland. For some reason, I've never been able to get into turn-based RPGs like others can, but I think this one's gonna go down as one of my favorites ever. The story's great on its own, but what really borders on magical here is the unlikely blend of the spellbinding retro-futuristic visual style and the really odd choice of music. Evaluated separately, they're both awesome, but when packaged together, they produce something that's greater than the sum of its parts, and it is captivating. This combo further propels a story that was already very good into something much more, and by the end, I was totally swept up in this universe and all of these relatable, believable characters. The gameplay's fairly simple, but it does give you some room to experiment with different abilities and builds, and the straightforward UI made it easy to switch things up on the fly and try different playstyles. I wouldn't call it perfect. There were some minor points of confusion with the inconsistent waypoint system and a lack of tutorial in certain parts, plus the whole thing is way too easy even for me. But at the end of the day, it barely mattered. This won't rank as high as it should due to my own hangups with the genre, but I am totally blown away that one dude put this whole thing together. Just missing that top spot this month is The Casting of Frank Stone at number 2. As a big fan of horror and the choose-your-own-adventure narrative blueprint, I already automatically knew I was gonna love this game, and I did, but it was different. This is a tie-in with the Dead by Daylight universe, so there were some clear additions to the formula to accommodate that, and it all felt pretty seamless. Since I've never played DBD, most of the playful references went right over my head, but they did a very good job of weaving that stuff into the gameplay and story without making it feel forced. Some of those additions made this the most video gamey supermassive game to date, with more complex minigames than ever, and even one mechanic that could almost be considered combat. But the branching narrative is always what makes these games so awesome, and this plot seemed to twist and turn based on your actions even more than usual from this team. My only gripe is that it wasn't as downright scary as these games usually are. Things remained pretty tense for almost the whole runtime, but I was never really afraid or even startled, and I startle easily. But I still loved it because I felt like everything hinged on my decisions, and that's something Supermassive does better than Telltale, Quantic Dream, Life is Strange, and everybody else in the business. And finally, my favorite game that I beat in the month of September is the one and only Astrobot. I don't go crazy for 3D platformers like a lot of people do, but my understanding is that Mario is the gold standard that can't really be touched, but I don't know if that's true anymore. This isn't a tech demo or some shallow PS5 graphical showcase. It's a full-blown AAA experience with dozens of levels, and every one of them feels like you're walking into a theme park. Everywhere you look, there's something fun to get into, and beneath each challenge, some nostalgic element from PlayStation's past is waiting to put a smile on your face. Seriously, over and over I'd be playing and suddenly realize I'd been grinning like an idiot for the last 20 minutes because every moment in this game is so damn charming. And for such a kid-friendly title, there's actually a lot that could have gone wrong. There's a surprising amount of complexity with the graphics, the physics, the sound design, and the level design. But somehow, Team Asobi's first real AAA game was released in pristine condition. Not a pixel one is out of place, and I wasn't able to identify a single bug or glitch. Astro's Playroom won't get the ranking it deserves because my preferences mostly lie elsewhere, but objectively, this and Animal Well are the only 2024 games I've beaten that I would call perfect. So that wraps up the month of September, and it brings us to a total of 88 games beaten so far in 2024, and a grand total of 535 since we started doing all this way back at the beginning of 2020. Please remember to click like if you liked the video, and next month we'll be playing the Silent Hill 2 remake, Ocarina of Time, Black Ops 6, and much more. So feel free to subscribe if you want to see what takes the top spot in October.